First of all, I want to thank you for the interest that you have for this subject. And I would like to give some few words about the urban interventions now. We all know that most of the people living in this world are starting to live in the urban context. And then they are expected to become 60% of the population, the world population will live in urban context. And we know also that there are, in the urban context, there are slums, there are many areas where people are living, they are prone to disaster, and they are poverty that we can have. And it is very interesting that humanitarian intervention can learn from what they have done during the 10 last years in the urban context. Talking about the engagement of the community in urban context, we know that intervening in urban context is different from intervening in rural context. I would like only to raise 3 elements that can influence the work, the engagement with the population. One of them is the density that we can have in the urban context, especially in the slums that we have. The second element is the diversity of the situations that we can have. The livelihood, it's more diversified in urban than in rural, and the kind of actors that we can find is also very diversified. I would like to point out one element is one kind of actor that we can find in urban context is what we call gangs. We can create a security problem for the humanitarian actors. And the third one is the mobility of the population. To have their job, the way they are living, the place they are living, the place they are working is not the same. They can they can move very quickly. Now, in this panel, we have 3 presentations. We will start with the presentation with Samuel. Samuel is a humanitarian policy advisor in British Red Cross, and he will give us his experience in Kathmandu Valley, trying to engage population, affected population in Kathmandu Valley. So, Samuel.
Okay, so my presentation is really about just the preparedness phase, but not just disaster risk management in a very long-term developmental sense, but also preparedness and readiness for the response. And that's what really brings out some of the really challenging things about engaging with the affected population in urban areas, is not just engaging in peacetime, so to speak, but engaging in the response. So I'll cover that as well. Now, I think really good practice, innovative approaches are only starting to be systematically explored in urban areas. I think there's a lot more learning if you look at the different contexts from rural areas. In certain situations, I think people avoid working in urban areas because it can be so complex and challenging, not just in areas where there's complex land issues. We've seen some of the issues in the Philippines most recently, but also in situations of urban violence, situations of conflict. I'm going to break the presentation up a bit into different phases of the disaster management cycle, how we're managing risk and also managing engagement with the affected population and the response, because there's different challenges and opportunities at different phases of the cycle. This whole presentation is based on a piece of work we did last year we've just published. I did with Francois Grunwald from Groupe URD. And there's a follow-up piece of work I've been doing with Bonner on Haiti. They're both natural hazard disaster focused. So I think in the discussion we can probably broaden it out to some of the work that's being done, ALNAP's work on urban violence, some of Groupe URD's work on cities in war as well. What I want to argue is that really overall engaging the urban population in managing risk, preparing for the actual response phase, needs a sensitive adoption of new approaches, different approaches and ways of working, also different partnerships. I just came from a session on the role of the state in engaging the affected population, not just looking at operational agencies and affected communities in a kind of dualism. And then also the role of new technologies, and I know Sharon's done a lot of work on that, and the Federation have done a lot, so there's lots we can learn from that. Okay, so just to give a bit of background on Kathmandu, I mean the situation, if an earthquake did hit mid-Nepal, is really quite frightening. The figures that I've got at the moment are probably a bit of an underestimate, but the contingency plans are all based on 100,000 people will be killed, 300,000 injured, 1.8 million displaced. So it's really a significant scale of disaster along the lines of what happened in Port-au-Prince, and so we're trying to draw some of the lessons from there as well. Diversity is one of the themes Bonner picked up, and just in terms of understanding the urban population before you can actually engage, understanding that each context is different, that's something that came up this morning. Urban space, particularly in Kathmandu, is very diverse. You have rich and poor areas, new and old neighbourhoods, highly populated centres sitting alongside peri-urban peripheries, places where they're still involved in agriculture, where the cities kind of engulf the rural area. Different administrative districts, industrial zones, all sitting side by side. And to add to that complexity, the actual communities themselves that we're looking to work with are often very heterogeneous. So you've got varying levels of wealth, but you've also got overlapping identities. Mobility is another theme that's been picked up in a lot of work that's happened on urban in the humanitarian sector in recent years, and I'm going to talk about that. But mobility from one part of the city to another on different timescales. People also marrying outside of their ethnic or religious groups, or having recently migrated from a rural area. So a lot of these overlapping issues that really need to be understood before you can even start thinking about, as an international agency, how you're engaging with the affected population or the at-risk population before a disaster. And I think what this means is we can't look through rural lenses. We can't assume a common level of need. We can't assume a common level of vulnerability in the urban population, or capacity within the communities. And capacity is a big element I want to focus on, the capacity of the affected population to prepare for disaster, to respond. So in terms of managing risk, I'm looking at managing risk first. One of the main issues is opportunity costs in people's time. If you want to engage people, and lots of agencies want to ask them questions and get them involved in workshops, a lot of people actually have to go to work, have to go to school, have to go to university, and that's not something we really take account of enough. So the opportunity costs, when people are weighing up these things, it's not because they're stupid and they don't realise that there are hazards, but it's where are their priorities lying. So that's an important element. And then in terms of technology, I think private sector development in somewhere like Kathmandu, where it's growing very fast, you see a lot of opportunities. And for what we're doing, for raising the awareness of risk. So you see Facebook, you see mobile and smartphones. But what I want to say here, and this is where I made the point about the sensitive adoption of new technologies, is that different mediums, so we're using plays, newspapers, radio, mobile phones, social media, can engage different segments of the population. And like we heard this morning, you don't just want to be engaging with those that have greatest access to resources and technology. So that's a really important point. And we can use approaches that have been used in public health and humanitarian crises for years, like knowledge, attitude, practice, to gain a more sort of evidence-based understanding, while also being anticipatory, looking at, okay, you know, Nepal is between China and India, there's a flood of smartphones coming in, how can we harness this in the programming we're doing, how can we engage younger people as well as those who may, you know, who may be best reached through newspaper. Then in the risk management phase, the final point I wanted to highlight was behaviour change and political economy, really understanding the power in politics. This is something that's been raised a lot. I think the development sector's come a long way in terms of applied political economy analysis. I don't think the humanitarian sector's really caught up so much. There are people who talk about it more at a policy level, but I don't think these things are brought out systematically enough in our programming. And so engaging with the gatekeepers at community level and really thinking about how different decision makers in the community need to be reached and innovative ways from actually ensuring penetration into the community. So in the Red Cross, the Federation and National Society side of the Red Cross, kind of assume we have penetration into the communities, but do we actually access the real decision makers? Are we really harnessing the business networks, the real power holders that are there in the community? So that's something I think we need to reflect critically on for ourselves and really in the urban area that we need to understand better. So simply targeting local leaders, whether they're legitimate, we don't know. I mean, the Haiti works highlighted that a lot. Engaging in conflict environments really brings that out, where, you know, engagement with non-state armed actors may be the same thing as engaging with the affected population. So we really need to not silo these things. But I think there needs greater flexibility in where we hold trainings and meetings, and I push for some of these tools that have come out of the development space on understanding the local political economy to really be used better, and that's something we detail in the report. We've got copies there, including an executive summary which just highlights the basic learning points for practitioners that can be brought out. So instead of having to read a 40-page document, you can engage with the basics. Okay, now in terms of preparedness and readiness for response, I think this is a really interesting area. It's something within Red Cross and Red Crescent National Societies we talk about a lot. There's been a lot of focus on first responders, but there are pros and cons to doing this, and there are challenges, particularly in urban areas, that we need to look at. So, to give one example, after the Sichuan earthquake in 2008, 95% of those that are pulled out of the rubble alive were pulled out by first responders, so being relatives, neighbours, and other people. So, you know, we do need to see the value of this, but conversely, without implementation of a building code in Kathmandu, this will have very little impact. So, you know, we need to balance different phases of the response. And a critical component of what we're doing in Kathmandu is training volunteers from at-risk communities in light search and rescue and in basic first aid and triage, linking them up with the mass casualty management response, which is linked to the government, international agencies. This really isn't without its challenges. We expect that as much as 50% of the population will be killed or incapacitated by the actual disaster. So that really is a major challenge. And there are of course limitations on what trained first responders can realistically be expected to do. So there were challenges when I've been presenting this work recently. So MSF countering that, you know, can affected population really be expected to do triage? Are there greater risks with that? Someone from the fire brigade saying that, you know, what sort of search and rescue can really be done? Actually, people can put themselves at greater risk if they go into these environments. They're not trained. So in Nepal, it's the armed police with training, bringing in Insarag and other actors. So it's about engaging across the system. And then in terms of local leadership, I think this is really important in Kathmandu specifically. The Red Cross, the Nepal Red Cross National Society, is a key node in this network, linking the affected community to the rest of the system. But you know, there are challenges in making these linkages, and the amount of time that affected communities have to engage with a sort of professionalised system. But what we're trying to do is make sure that, as I said, in mass casualty management, in triage, in blood supply, dead body management, all of these very practical things for response, there is a clear role designated for affected communities that can then be linked up to other more professionalised actors, be they from the government or be they from the Red Cross movement or the international agencies. And then in terms of information and communications management, the aftermath of the disaster, I think, would be a very, very tense situation. Rumours can spread very quickly and create panic, and these expectations have to be managed. So a clear and well understood communication strategy is really vital to this, and making sure that it's two-way. But again, to come back to this issue of technology, it's not just empowering those that have the greatest access, or in urban areas who have increased access to technology. It's also about ensuring we're in line with humanitarian principles in what we do, and ensuring particularly a focus on impartiality. So if there's a greater call for demand-led response, and people have phones and can contact agencies directly, are they just the people that have the greatest power? Are they the people that are perhaps least vulnerable? And therefore our assistance is not based on a robust assessment process, less beneficiary identification. So all of these common processes need to support that as well. And I think I've managed to miss out part of my presentation by printing on both sides. So I've just come back to what I think is quite an important point. In everything we're doing, we need to be alert and agile. But to be alert and agile, we need to understand the system and how it's changing in the urban area. So this goes right through the whole phases of the response. So understanding at the assessment phase, when we're doing a vulnerability and capacity assessment, are we effectively engaging those people who, as I said, can't attend because they may be daily labourers, they face significant opportunity costs. What is the community we're working with? Do we understand that community, its historical profile, its lack of social cohesion, perhaps because of mobility in urban areas? And all of these things mean we need to adapt our assessment approaches. So combining in urban areas, you have a lot more data coming from secondary sources, geospatial sources. We can use all of this as well, not just working off a participatory approach. So we can combine both sides. And it's not just about whether we engage a community for all of our assessment data, but whether we supplement this with different sources. Okay, and then the other element of alertness and agility I really wanted to talk about was mobility. And to come back to this, every day large numbers of people are moving to, from within the city for work, for schooling. So what does this mobility actually mean for the response and the readiness for the response? So you remember in Port-au-Prince, the time of the earthquake had a significant impact on the number of casualties, the same as September the 11th, if we think what happened in the States. So understanding that and building that into your processes is key. And there's going to be impact on mortality, there's going to be impact on injuries, the number of handicapped. So we need to understand all of that. But there's also going to be impact on, for us, the affected community, who we're training as first responders. Well, what part of the city are they going to be in? Are they going to be men or are they going to be women? Because where have they moved in the city? So there are key questions about that. Who it's best to train? If it's just women left there in Nepal, culturally, okay, we've trained them, but will they actually be empowered sufficiently to be involved in the response? So there's lots of debate about these things, but then, men, the sustainability may be less because there may be more scope for migration. Lots of people moving to the Gulf, for example. So all of these complex dynamics really need to be brought into consideration. Okay, so I've skipped about a bit as I lost my way, but this is something Francois drew up after the earthquake in Port-au-Prince. And he adapted this for the work we did in Kathmandu. I think it's still a gross oversimplification of some of the issues, but what we really want to do is try and understand the links and the connections and how the affected community fits into the overall preparedness and response system. So ultimately, really the conclusion about urban preparedness, and this goes for all levels, not just the role of the affected community in it, is that we can't be certain about the magnitude of the earthquake. There's all these issues of complexity, movement, different risks developing every day in terms of people's construction practices, in terms of how people access water supply. Its epicenter, its timing, and all of these things have implications for not just the impact, but the actual operational and political constraints of the response. So, you know, a lot of actors will flood the response, particularly military actors, I think, given the region. So, no preparedness or no preparedness plan can ensure complete readiness for affected communities and operational agencies. So really what we want to focus on is a state of alertness and a state of agility in adapting the response to the impact and the needs of the scene on the ground, with attention focused on the capacities of readiness for immediate response, but rapid adaptability to the demands of the situation. And that's the overall issue, is that there is such great complexity that local actors can understand some of the particular needs, but overall the response needs to be able to be quite fluid and really to take on, like I talked about in the communication side, the information coming in from affected communities as well. And that's all part of having a more adaptive response. So just to conclude, I think engaging the urban population, some of these issues around time management, some of these issues around opportunity costs, mobility, are coming out, some of the opportunities around technology. But I think we're only at the beginning in terms of systematic efforts, really, to improve both our analysis in fora like these and our operational practice, making sure that these sorts of learning studies we're doing are actually informing what we're doing on the ground. I'll leave it
there. In your presentation, you said you raised the use of new technologies. But when you are talking, I took note, and there are two other things I want to add. One is the legitimacy of the people who can represent the population. It's very difficult to have the legitimacy in the urban area. And the second one is, can we think that all of them are a group have common interest on something in urban context? So, thank you very much. And now we will go back to the second presentation, and will share with us her experience in Nairobi, in Mukuru, slum in Nairobi. She is working for a national organization, and then she's 10 years experience she has in working with communities in this.
Yeah, my presentation is going to be on Mukuru and engagement in Mukuru slums. That is on humanitarian response. And the outline of the presentation is going to be who MSDP is. That's the short of Mukuru Slums Development Projects. And then MSDP humanitarian programs, opportunities of working in Mukuru, challenges working in Mukuru, MSDP experience working with international NGOs, and then I'll share a scenario, worked in humanitarian response, challenges faced during that response, and advice to humanitarian, anyone who feels like you want to do a humanitarian activity in Mukuru, what would be the best approach. So about MSDP, it's a local NGO working in Mukuru, informal settlement, for the last 10 years with youth, children, and women. It was founded by a nun from the Sisters of Mercy, who had originated from Ireland. The thematic areas of MSDP are education, that is on secondary education, primary school education, and it's mostly on access, whereby how children access education, not just providing a school and education materials. Then there is also the vocational part, vocational skills. That's for youth who are unemployed. And then rehabilitation and economic empowerment. That one, rehabilitation focuses on street boys, and economic empowerment focuses mostly on women. Because in Mukuru, most of the households, like 70% of them, are headed by women. MSDP partners with international NGOs to implement its programs. It's those international NGOs that build the capacity of MSDP, and at the same time, they're the ones who offer us the financial support. MSDP humanitarian programs, that is MSDP, it focuses on intervention. MSDP as an organization, we mostly focus on long-term development programs. However, it also implements humanitarian response programming in Mukuru. What this means is that in most, as we do our development work, we try as much as possible to alert the international NGOs that we partner with when we identify maybe a slow crisis or emergency that is reported by the beneficiaries to us. Maybe, for example, when we implemented a food insecurity program, that one is not, it doesn't mean that there was no food in Kenya. The food was there, but the price was so high, such that person who earns an average of 200 per day, or who is not assured of anything as per that day, they'll end up maybe sleeping without food. So in these case scenarios whereby the community themselves came to us and they told us, they report on different cases that so and so lost her 2 children because of hunger, they don't have food, so and so has died, she was bedridden, and she was confused, her young kids were not able to get food. So it's the community who come to give us that response. And what we do is that we alert now the international NGOs that we partner with them. We tell them there is this situation, and they give us maybe tools to monitor how that situation is. That is questionnaires and clustering small zones. We call them zones in Mukuru, and we ask them what is the case, what is this that is happening, and then that way we're able to get the issues whereby they tell us when you're buying a bunch of vegetables, that's Skuma Wiki, those who have been in Nairobi know about it. So you find that one bunch which you buy at 5 shillings, it's now so reduced, it's only 3 branches. And these 3 branches cannot feed your family of 5 or 6. And that way, most of them, the cases are either some become malnourished, and those who are either HIV positive, they only end up dying because they cannot really survive on that issue with the drugs and all that. Then the other emergency is on fire tragedy, and I note that one was in 2009 and in 2010 on to 2011. Like every year we must have fire tragedies, more than 5, and one of them has to be a major one. Like there was a recent one that was a Sinai village, which over 100 people lost their lives, and all those were not recorded. Not all of them were recorded, but from our records, there were 100, but what the government said was a maximum of 75, and that was not the real case. Then we also so in this case, we addressed the food crisis situation through a cash transfer, where that humanitarian organization that we approached were able to bring some resources together, and then we were able to respond. Then humanitarian support, we mobilized, gave information on critical cases and material support to a few cases. This was on fire tragedies. We are also ourselves as MSDP, we do not have the capacity sometimes to respond. So, and when we only have to rely on the staff who are working in the INGOs to give us the technical support, and in most cases, because we lack that capacity, we only mobilize, we give them the list and all the data, then they enter in and they work directly at that point. Then opportunities of working in Mukuru, that there is a high population in the productive age group. You'll find so many youth, so many young women and men. Very aged people, they are very, very few. But majority are very young, who you can easily use them to monitor their times of crisis or emergencies, and at the same time also they can be able to respond. Then there's a social cohesion. For example, in the post-election in 2007, Mukuru was still very, very peaceful as compared to Kibera slum, where there was chaos. Mukuru, there was no chaos. The people are still cohesive because there's diversity of tribes and communities in that area. There is also easy access to Mukuru. There are no gatekeepers. So if you want to carry out any activity in Mukuru, as long as you inform the administration, who is the chief, then you will not find communities harboring or saying, before you enter to this community, you must give me this. Those ones, we don't experience them, and even for newcomers to Mukuru. Then, being within the urban setting, there is the access to infrastructure, that is ICT, hospitals, schools, roads, all those, there is that accessibility is there. The other opportunities that, there are job opportunities and employment services given that it's within an economic center, in the economic center. That is, Mukuru is surrounded by industrial companies. So most of these companies are the ones who benefit from the casual laborers, and there is an overflow of the people who can offer that, can offer skills, and the companies are not also able to actually accommodate each and every person to get into employment. Then the communities also know their times of crisis. They can say, for example, but they do not record or discuss them. But someone behind their mind will know. In the month of January, things are very tough. Money does not circulate easily. And what happens is that those who are working in industrial companies where they are on casual basis, the employment level goes down. Because at that time, if you are producing, for example, cooking fat, most people are not consuming it at the same level as maybe in April or in August or December. So what it means is that manufacturers cut down on their casual laborers because they are not selling so much. That means they miss out on jobs. And then at the same time, they say that most people use their money in December. So even if you are doing a small business of selling clothes, they are not selling as fast. So those are their times of crisis, and this is after we had done a questionnaire with the help of some 2 international NGOs to just survey which are these very critical times. They know them, and they'll explain the background on them, but they do not have a proper mechanism of knowing this is exactly the time, because sometimes also like fire tragedies, we don't know when they come. They just appear and happen at any time. Then challenges working in Mukuru, there are several, but I'd like maybe to highlight the first one, that is on people are settled on public land, hence no rights over their habitation. This means that the land people are living on, they do not have the rightful tenure to those lands. So sometimes, as much as we tell people to come together and start to think about the emergencies or bring up the cohesion so that in case of fire, this is how we should respond, most people are reluctant because they feel, this is my temporary home, there's somewhere else, it's a temporary settlement. So they do not want to invest their time, their skills, and also commitment to that area. But again, you realize that these are people who are going to be in that area for over a period of maybe 10 or 20 or 30 years. They have been in the same house, but they do not even want to even give some time even for their own sanitation, maybe to just clean trenches, because they say, you know, this house, I'm renting this house, and anytime the government can come and evict me. But that is true because the evictions happen with no notice. People come, you just see tractors, they come and they evict you, and sometimes those are run by the government and some by cartels who want to evict that you in that area. Then they resell the same pieces of land to other people. That's what they normally do. And then Mukuru is also densely populated, slum hence. However, much interventions are done by the civil society to still live out on a large number of needy population. This is, the place is actually very densely populated, and the houses are not numbered in any way. So even if you want to to support or to respond to some few people, sometimes it becomes very difficult to do that, because as much as I know my neighbor and all that, at times of crisis or when there is an emergency, everyone wants to get their own, and sometimes you find that the rightful people, needy people, or those who should get that response, they miss out on that. And then many of this population also do not have identity card. That one that one only advises us on the type of response. If you want to respond, on which areas how would you respond? For example, when you are responding on cash transfer, we realize that even ourselves, as much as we cannot be given money whereby we issue cash because of security issues, so we chose to do the mobile transfer, because also the bigger picture was we wanted the government to buy into that issue when they are responding, to buy into the the using of the mobile money transfer. So we were advised by the international NGO, that's the way they will go, because that's a decision they had made. We also accepted it, but at the end of the response, we find that if you want to use the money transfer, you must have an identity card. And if you miss out on that, you will not benefit. And then those who are the actual victims, those who are prone to be victimized or to be left out, and who are very vulnerable, they do not have identity cards, because they are the ones who form actually a major chain of this major circle of poverty. Because you realize, you said that your mother never had an identity card, so you cannot get an identity card, and that's how it is in Kenya. If my mother didn't have an identity, I will not have, and my children will not have. Because for you to get an identity card, you must bring your parents' identity card. So we left out so many people who are very needy, and that one was something we felt like most of these people we were targeting didn't have, we really blocked them because of the system, and that's how it was discussed and said that that's how it is going to take place. Then there is a poor and weak governance translating into non-participation of citizens, and accountability and untransparent government and service providers. Sometimes during emergencies, some money is allocated by the government to support maybe victims of fire, or when there is this slow onset on maybe food crisis and all that. Then you realize that if that money is given out maybe to support such people, even the very needy, the aged, will never know whether that money came, because it's information that's shared in a certain cycle, such that if you are not influential, if you are not powerful, if you are not connected to anyone who has those powers or is in that influential circle, you miss out on the information. So maybe if I'm a village elder, it's my sisters and brothers who are going to benefit from maybe the food that maybe the government is giving for free for the very needy. So that's also another challenge. And then unplanned settlement leading to congestion of access, roads and sewage. I think that one is in most of the slums. And then Mukuru, like any other slum, is also not monitored against early warning triggers on a regular basis. Hence, it becomes a challenge to get any comprehensive data. It's so difficult to get that data on who is needy when those crises are happening. As much as we tried, it's because of the issues that we were told verbally. Verbally, like, no, so-and-so died because they did not have food, their children have done this. So those are the stories that we relied on, and then the NGO we are working with, they gave us a form to interview households. But again, we could not interview all of them, so we only managed to interview around 3,000, and we got this substantial information, but after responding, that was the end. So right now, we don't know whether there's another crisis going on slowly. We are not aware, because no one was keen in monitoring, and also our capacity is not that much. Then, being an informal settlement, it is very difficult to control people, especially outsiders who are not affected. For example, like in Mukuru, when there was a tragedy, for example, fire, those who come to get the packages, like Red Cross, are the first to respond. And they have a defined package of what they respond with. That's a blanket, a jerry can, cooking pot, and yeah, those are the things they respond with. You realize that they say everyone who has been affected, let's meet in this certain camp so that we're able to control people. But those who are affected do not have sometimes the energy to get to those camps that they have formed. And other people from maybe Kibera slum, they're the ones who make their way to Mukuru. They benefit with so many things, and then they go. So by the time maybe Red Cross have dispatched everything, that's when now those who are very much affected and confused, that's when they are making their way to the centers where the support was being given when the support is already gone. And then and most people take also advantage of looting, and they are outsiders. They do not come from within maybe the affected area. Then MSDP experience with humanitarian organization. On the positive side, they are experienced and have the technical skills in responding. And then they also have the ability and opportunity to mobilize resources to respond. Because in times of emergencies, we realize that it's very costly. And like for us, to really get such a budget in a hurry, it's sometimes it's a challenge, I would say. Then bringing in new ideas and strategies and also innovations, because they have experiences maybe of when they responded in other areas. Then we also have a global presence and network, hence good in influencing and advocating. Like when you are working on the cash transfer, the IGO you are working with, the two of them were able to mobilize, to advocate to the government to pick up the cash transfer. And right now, the cash transfer is still going on, but only reaching out to the aged. And the other target groups were left out, so it's only reaching out to the aged, and that I think was a positive thing from that. Then on negative, most organizations don't have ready or available funds to respond, hence it takes long to respond. So as much as they responded, initially they responded maybe on a small scale as they were trying to resource for other funds. And this one is because they explained to us they were lucky that their director had some kitting which he managed to use immediately. So sometimes when it takes long to respond, the victims move from that area to other areas, and then that becomes the end. Or some after that it's no longer, maybe after 3 days or 2 days, it's no longer news and nobody is interested with it, and those who are affected, they remain that way, they find their own survival means. Sharing of knowledge is also very minimal. Like when we ourselves, when we are working with an NGO, they keep a lot of information to them. We are only told to mobilize this number of people. Can you call these people? We want to meet with them. When they come, they make decisions at that level, and sometimes you don't know why they made that decision. Sometimes you wonder, why did they respond this way, not this way? They tell you, we were sitting in our emergency team, and this is how we decided to do this. And you can only follow what they have said, because at that point you also don't have resources to object, or you have nothing to put on the table apart from your skills. But yeah, and the other thing is that there's confusion in the community when they are engaged directly. Hence, the community cannot differentiate emergency response and development, and they ask different questions and remain unsatisfied with our work as a local NGO, because the INGO will come and pump in a lot of money and do several things at the same time. But once that one comes to an end and the response of the emergency is over and they go back to their offices, we are left in that community. So when we are left there, the people will come and tell us, instead, why did you buy blankets? Instead of doing that, you should have given me that 1,000 shillings. I would have bought maybe potatoes and start making chips, or, they have their own ideas and they keep blaming us. I thought you spent so much money on buying that jerry can, and I know I did need a jerry can. I would have bought it for 20 shillings. You would have given me that money so that, they tell us we spent so much money, we should have instead given them the money, they manage their small budgets, and they would have done much with that money. And they keep saying, even when we are in the chief baraza, that's the community forums, they say, but we'd like to advise MSDP, next time when you have such money, don't do this, do this. But at the same time, we were not even part of the decision making. And we are left to explain. Sometimes you wonder now what will I tell these people? Will I tell them that you are just, you know, sometimes it becomes so difficult, but we just manage to sit over it and hoping that there's sometime they forget about it. Then there is also lack of coordination. When there is this response, you realize that there are so many people coming in to respond with different things. And like maybe Red Cross, everyone knows when there is this fire breakout, Red Cross will give us this packet. That's automatic. But some people, maybe that's not what they need at that time. They need something else. Then there are companies around them, they say, oh, did you see that fire in the television? Oh, and Mukuru is just behind here. As a company, we need to respond. So they go buy milk and bread. And they come and they give it. There are some people maybe smuggle, they steal what. Someone will also sit and say, I have this bag of beans, let me take it. And then you realize that because of lack of coordination, fewer group, maybe a certain group who are not even the rightful affected people, they're the ones who end up with everything. Because these people who are responding, maybe companies and all that, they do not know how to respond. Then they want to help, yes, and they don't know how to get there. But once they bring and they say, okay, we have brought beans, what, people start, fighting for it, and a lot of it go to waste. And then in most cases, no initial assessment is done on what the people need. And then a scenario, I'll be very, very fast, is the scenario that I was sharing on Sinai, and actually the issues that I have raised there, whereby the people who are not the rightful affected people are the ones who benefited, because those who are affected have taken a lot of smoke. Some were in the hospital, some were dead and confused. They were not there at the scene to benefit. So there were some in the hospital, some were maybe just seated somewhere. And then, scenario on humanitarian response, that was, I also discussed that on the issue of food. This one was just trying to elaborate it. And then on approaches, that one was on cash transfer, which I've also talked about it. Assessing the risk in delivering cash directly through envelopes, and that's why we opted for the mobile cash transfer. Then community-based targeting was used to draw up the list of beneficiaries, households. And then triangulation and validations were also done. Because this one, because of the slow onset, we were prepared. But as much as we did this, the response we did not form a decision on how the response will be. And then household visits, we did also the household visits to do on spot check. But again, this is the list we have given to the INGO. They told us we wanted to do a Dana home visit to so and so and so. So that's what we did. And then challenges we faced when we were responding is that the need was higher than the program, what the program delivered, because we only reached out to 3,000 households. Then there was exclusion, given that Mukuru is a place with a population of around 600,000. And then managing the political pressure by provincial administration, influential people and cartels to get their people on the beneficiary list. Also, that one. Then what humanitarians should do to engage with urban populations is, first of all, I'm not very good on how humanitarian response should take place, but one thing that I've come to realize that securing the area of disaster is very, very important, so that at least you can know it's from this area that we are going to, like fire tragedy. It's good to just know that it's from these two zones that fire took place, and we only respond closer to these new zones, because Mukuru is very large. So when you say maybe fire took place in a certain zone, then where you form the center of responding is so far, it's on the other end. People don't usually maybe prefer staying on your locality. Maybe after the fire, you can go and stand from near the house that got burnt. That way we'll be able to get to the rightful people. Then have a system of identifying the rightful victims. Then carry out an immediate needs assessment, and also enhance coordination, but I don't know how. And that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for your presentation. There are two elements that retain my attention when we are talking. The first one is the fact that you are working as a link between the population and the international NGOs. And I can see that you have a good communication with the population. They can come to you and tell you what they want, and they give you addresses. But you are talking also about the difficulty to talk to the communication with the international NGO. You have good communication with the population, but you have less communication with the international NGOs. And the second element is the fact that we said in this area there is social cohesion. It's not something we can find everywhere in the slums. This is, for me, a particularity of your place. So, thank you very much. We are going to Sharon now, who will share with us experience of IFRC in Haiti. So, thank you.
I will first apologise because I'm going to look at a very small snapshot of Haiti. I know it was a massive response and there was a lot of work done there. So this is a very small snapshot that I'm looking at around our work in camps around 1 year after the earthquake and how we engaged with these camps, particularly in relation to shelter. So the Haiti operation, very quick look at it. Biggest operation for the Red Cross since the tsunami and our biggest single country response. So we had a huge amount of sectors. There was health, shelter, water and relief, as I'm sure many agencies had. The earthquake itself was obviously one of the biggest urban disasters that we've seen. It hit 10 kilometres just below the surface and it affected around 2.3 million people. So that's almost a quarter of the population in Haiti. So really, really massive. And particularly for the urban areas. Obviously that meant with 2.3 million displaced, there was a huge shelter response. It was one of the main preoccupations of the responders. And it was also the first time for IFRC that they had what we call beneficiary communication, and I apologise for the use of the word beneficiary. I know it's not ideal, we're not a huge fan of it, but that's what we're called. What I would say is it matters more what we do than what we're called. So beneficiary communications for the IFRC encompasses two clear areas. One is around accountability, so are we transparent, are we set up to be participatory, are we listening to people, all those elements. But then the other big element for me is around behaviour change communication. So I work with the programmes to see how we can make our health education, our disaster preparedness, reach more people and be more engaging and have more impact. So it's quite a dual role, although I feel the two do complement. And we had a number of tools to do this in Haiti, and I'll come on to them later. So first I'm going to look at what are some of the challenges that we had of working in an urban area, and particularly in terms of Port-au-Prince. For those of you who've worked there, you know it's incredibly complex, lots of different issues going on, and it was always very difficult to even scratch the surface of what was really going on in communities there. Probably the first one was the systematic poverty that had been there for a very, very long time. So even before the earthquake, I think it was 70% of people lived on less than $2 a day. There was a long history of development and humanitarian NGOs. So it was a culture of people who were used to NGOs, probably sick to death of us by this point. And they were used to getting limited support in limited ways, fairly mistrustful of aid agencies. So I myself was in one of the camps one day and a guy said to me, I mean, this is great what you're doing now, but what are you going to do next year, or the year after, or the year after? This is no good for 2 months. So there was a real feeling from the community that we were going to be there for a short while and then we were going to go. So their attitude to working with us was, let's get what we can while we can, and who can blame them? Social cohesion, which my colleagues have mentioned as well, was a real issue, particularly in a lot of the camps. So what you had was urban communities who had all gone to maybe different camps, they didn't know their neighbours, they'd been through a traumatic event, maybe lost family members. They weren't really interested in working together as a community and helping one another and looking after those less vulnerable. So that was a real difficulty for us in trying to identify who are the community leaders, who can we work with, how do we try and do these things that really do require you to have a cooperating community. And there was a real issue around who represented the community. So in Annex Della Marie, there was a camp committee when we turned up. But that committee was not a very good committee. It was made up of the loudest, the strongest, the gang leaders, the community themselves. The rest of the residents didn't want to challenge this committee. We couldn't challenge them because you get death threats and told you can't work here anymore. So, it was incredibly difficult. How do you work with this committee and do what they want so you can keep working? But how do you also make sure that you're helping the most vulnerable and not just giving shelters to the loudest and the most powerful? Also the scale of need, so obviously it was a massive earthquake, it was huge, many people affected. Where do you start? Who is the most needy? If you'd been to Port-au-Prince before the earthquake, it already did not look like a good place to live. So it was very difficult to identify, and I don't think any of us necessarily did it that well. I think we picked somewhere and just started working, to be honest. I think that's probably the way we did it. Also limited local authority, so 25% of government was killed in the earthquake. So they were also massively devastated by it. A lot of buildings were gone, home ministries were taken down. So who do you liaise with? Who do you work with? Who provides us with the direction? And I think there was no real government direction for at least the first 6 to possibly 12 months of the response. Yeah, and then camps space and legal issues, so obviously an incredibly cramped city, 86% of the population lived in slum dwellings. There was also real legal issues around land ownership, and I know this comes up again and again in these kinds of disasters, but I think the inheritance law in Haiti was that if you die and you have 4 sons, all 4 sons inherit and have to agree on what's going to happen to the land. So even if you find a piece of land, you have to get all 4 sons to agree that you can build on it. So there was a lot of false starts for us where we got going with a project, we thought we could do something, and someone would pop up and say, oh no, you can't build here, go away, Red Cross. So that was a real challenge. And then gang influences, you mentioned this, Bona, but yeah, it was a real issue, particularly in Annex and also La Piste, the 2 camps that we worked in. They were right next to Cité Soleil. The gangs were firmly in control of those areas. They wanted the jobs, they wanted the security, they wanted the control of the beneficiary lists. And like I say, if you say no to them, then the death threats come. So how do you try and negotiate those 2 goals? And then high mobility, we've mentioned this already. People were moving around different camps. If the word got out that one camp was getting a lot of good services, people would move. And also, what we discovered, particularly in La Piste, was a lot of people had moved from the slum dwelling Cité Soleil into one of the earthquake camps, or supposedly earthquake-affected camps, because the level of support and service in that camp was better than what they had before the earthquake. And a colleague of mine actually came back from La Piste one day and said, I just interviewed this guy, and he said that he's quite happy now that he's got much better services. He gets water, there's a clinic here, sometimes they come and distribute goods. This is much better than what he had before the earthquake. So, that makes it difficult to identify who's in need, because even if you weren't directly affected by the earthquake, your need is still there. However, there's also opportunities of urban working, and many of these have been mentioned already. So often the people in an urban setting will have had better education, better access to education, so they may be more literate. Certainly in the camps, you would find, certainly in the early days, there was a certain amount of middle class people in those camps as well, who had lost their homes as well, who might have been teachers or community leaders, and had that kind of leadership quality, which was great for us because it meant we could have good counterparts that could help us in some way to try and create this sense of community. Also, people are more connected. There's better access to internet, there's more mobile phone signal, people are more likely to have a mobile phone. mass media is there as well, newspapers, radio. So there's a lot more information and a lot more ways for us to communicate. But then equally, there's a lot more information about us that we're not in control of. And you have to be aware of that. It's not just what you tell the community, but it's what they've already heard about you or what's being said about you on this radio station. And if it's not good, then that really affects the levels of trust there. And also, if you're telling them something completely different from what they heard from their friend down the road or they heard on the radio, then it really affects how your relationship is and whether they believe you. Also, people were concentrated, so that does make it easier logistically than having communities that are 400 to 500 miles apart. So having everyone in one place does make it easier. But I think someone mentioned that it does mean that rumour spreads, and we saw a lot of that in Haiti. One or two people come up with a little story, and before you know it, the whole camp knows there's a strike on, you can't go back to work, and everything stops for a few days. So tackling rumour and trying to make sure that people came to us if they heard stories was a really big part of what we tried to do. We also had a very humanitarian literate audience, if that's the right way to put it. As I said, these were communities used to NGOs, used to working with us. This was good because there was some sort of knowledge of who's supposed to do what the kind of, the workshops and how all these things work. It wasn't new to them to come and spend a day writing on flip chart paper. Having said that, it did mean that they were jaded. Many community members told me, well, I'm sick of answering these questions, nothing ever changes, we just get the same stuff all the time, or people come and ask us questions and don't come back again. And it also meant they could manipulate the system as well. So they knew how to work in NGO and how to get around our systems and how to beat the verification processes, and that made it, it was incredibly interesting, really tricky place to work. And then government support, so all eyes were on the capital. The government wanted to see the capital looking better. So in one sense this was good because we could open doors more quickly and we could push for that kind of big government support easier than perhaps they could in the rural areas. But equally it meant we were under pressure to perform and not always in the way we would like to. So I think it was before 2012 anniversary of the earthquake. The government decided that they needed to clear Magate camp, which was right next to the airport. Now clearly they wanted it cleared, so when all the journalists come in, it looks like the place is much better, and the first thing you see when you arrive in Haiti is not this camp. So they put the pressure on Red Cross to do it. Now it's good, it needed clearing, but the pressure was there to do it in 2 months, which is not an ideal way to work. But when you've got the support of the government and they're going to back you and they're going to help you do it, maybe it's best just to go. But it's always a balance. So looking specifically at Annex Del Marie, so this was a camp of around, when we started there, 800 families. We got permission from all 3 mayors that covered the camp to build transitional shelters, but only transitional shelters. They would not allow anything more permanent to be built on the land, and gave us an agreement that the shelters built there would be safe for 3 years at least. However, those 350 shelters would go to the most vulnerable in the camp, but what about the other 450 families, and how could we protect the 350 that got a shelter and not put them at risk from the 450 who didn't get a shelter? Bearing in mind there's no social cohesion, nobody particularly likes their neighbours, you don't really want to work with Red Cross, so it was a real challenge. So some of the steps that we went through was the camp committee, which I mentioned, not the camp committee we would have chosen, but what we did try to do was work with them while working around them. It's the only way we could really describe it. Challenge them where we could and give in where we had to. I think that was probably the only way to do it. As much as possible, we tried to build up that committee with a wider membership of more women, for example, and more of the vulnerable families and the people that we identified. We had a team of dedicated liaison volunteers with Haitian Red Cross who would go in, usually daily, and would just be there to speak to people, to listen what the concerns were. And what they tried to do was quietly verify what the committee was telling us. So if the committee told us these are the most vulnerable, then they would do their quiet verification, and often would find out that the committee's family and friends and everything like that were all on the list as well. I mean, and there was real issues as well with the committee. There was one particularly nasty case where we got rumours from people in the camp that the committee were telling women they had to sleep with them to get on the beneficiary list. So we had to very quickly get in and tackle those rumours, and those liaison volunteers were brilliant for that. Were able to feed back the rumours but also try and quash them. Local authority involvement, so I mentioned there was 3 mayors that covered the area, so we did manage to negotiate with them and get all 3 of them to agree, and that actually took about 2 or 3 months of negotiation. We had regular community meetings as well, face to face with the committee, but as much as possible we tried to open those meetings up to anyone who wanted to attend. So we had a wider community coming and listening to what was being said. Because often the committee would be telling the camp stuff that we hadn't said and feeding that rumour mill again. So it's trying to make sure as much as possible that that community were hearing things from us directly as well as from the committee. And part of all of that was a comprehensive beneficiary communication plan that was part of the team that I was part of that we ran. So looking at the plan, the aims of that was really what I mentioned, to get people to understand how we were selecting beneficiaries, to try and build some sort of acceptance that the most vulnerable should be helped. Try and get people to take part in the process. So a lot of the shelters that were built by people who lived in the community. And also the same with mutual respect. So we'll respect you if you respect us and don't threaten our safety and don't threaten to kill us, basically. Parts of the ways we did that was a mix of technology and non-technology. So notice boards, I know they're really standard, but what we did was keep them really updated, and that's actually a huge job. It's easy to put up a notice board, stick some posters on it and walk away, but I was surprised myself at how much work it is to produce posters on a weekly basis that explain shelter and pictures. You know, these are quite complex processes, so I almost had a staff member who just managed the notice boards, not just in this camp but in other ones. Also on there was suggestion boxes which we made sure were emptied weekly, and the information collated and shared with the shelter programme team as well, and responded to as much as possible. We had a fairly innovative SMS system that we used for a lot of mass messaging around hurricane warnings, disaster preparedness. It was a really good technological system that was since rolled out in Sierra Leone, and we're working to set up in Kenya at the moment. So it's great for mass messaging, but what we used in Annex was we were able to input everybody's telephone number that lived in that camp and keep in touch with them via SMS. So we would let them know when community meetings were happening. We did surveys to find out if people, so some of the other shelter options that came up through the community actually was around if you had your own land, we would build a tea shelter on it. If you had a house that was marked green so it needed minor repairs, we would come and repair it for you. And also it was a community member who suggested rental grants, so we also had a rental grant scheme where if you found somewhere you wanted to live, we would give you the rent for 1 year and a livelihoods grant alongside that. So these were some of the complex shelter options open to people. So yeah, the SMS system, we could do surveys to ask people, do you have land or do you have a house that needs repair, to try and find these people. We also used a sound truck with basic health information and all of that, and disaster preparedness information, but also with quite specific information about how these shelter options work and how to access them. Laterally, we had a telephone, T-telephone Croix Rouge, it was called, which is an automated phone line, which was menu operated. You could get information on all sorts of diseases, sexual health, on how the Red Cross worked, how to find a job with us. It was very, very extensive. And that was funded by the Humanitarian initiative, which is the back of the room there, thanks Tim. It was a really innovative way to use IVR technology, which was an automated phone line. You phone up, you pick the menu options you want to listen to, but we also used it for surveys, so we were able to ask people how they've modified their tea shelter, what they've done with it, what issues they might still be having, and that's still being used to that purpose now. And we also tried as much as possible to share resident success stories. So if somebody had their house repaired or had moved into a rental property and set up a business, we tried to bring them back to Annex to explain how they've been helped and how it worked as a means of encouraging other people to look at those options. And it's probably no surprise that most of the camp wanted a shelter. That was their option number one, because it meant they had something that they owned that belonged to them. But obviously with 350 shelters, that was never going to be enough for everyone. And one of the other big main ways of engaging with the community was the NULA telephone line. So this was a third-party organisation based on the UCPD model from Kenya. And actually UCPD came out and helped them set up NULA in Haiti after the earthquake. So we worked with them, they had a call centre staff, we trained their staff on how to answer the most common questions that people might ask, like how do you select beneficiaries, how does the rental grant scheme work, I've not got my livelihoods grant yet, where is it? All these kind of common questions that people were asking. The line was free to call in the early days. We even had volunteers in the camps with phones that somebody could take and go and make a call on it if they wanted. What was good about the NULA system was it was anonymous. So even if you didn't want to raise your concern or your complaint directly to a Red Cross worker, it was a way to raise it more anonymously or independently or just taking the Red Cross out of it. And every week we would follow up on all the calls that had come in, and anything that hadn't been answered, we'd work with the shelter team to answer. We had around 8,000 calls in 2012 alone, so that's a massive amount of people that are phoning this line. And it didn't just cover Annex, but it covered quite a number of our programmes. And 85% of the people who had called NULA said they were happy with the service, they found it easy to use. And for us, it meant we could identify problems early. So there was an issue with some of the roofs leaking. So before it became a huge issue and there was demonstrations in the camp and everyone was protesting against us, we were able to get in and fix that quite quickly. And one of the quotes that I think it was Ultra had done an evaluation was that what people felt with NULA and the shelter was that they had choice, that these options gave them choice rather than having something sort of forced on them. Having said that, it was still predetermined. Your only option was still shelter, and we all know that a community and a home is about more than 4 walls and a roof. So as we moved on from the T shelter, we moved into what Red Cross called the Integrated Neighbourhood Approach, or INA for short, because we love acronyms. And it was about looking at a community and trying to understand what was needed to make that community thrive. Is it sanitation? Is it education? Is it healthcare? What are the elements? And the community themselves would identify what those elements were, and then they would have to try and come up with the solutions, and we would facilitate that. So it was really a new way of working for us, and it's still ongoing now. I don't have huge amounts of information because I've left as this was starting. But one of the most interesting aspects of Pull Out is the Voice of the Community conference. So before all this really started, we organised a conference for social organisations, civil society organisations, government, communities themselves, and I think it was about 50% community members at it, and obviously Red Cross as well. And it was to get an idea of what had worked and what hadn't worked, and what advice were the community giving us, what did they want from us. It comes as no shock that they said that we didn't understand community well enough. We need to be careful about who we decide the leaders are and make sure that they're truly representative. This is no shock really. That we need to work more equally with local authority and make them equal partners with us, and have an exit plan and a sustainability plan before we even begin working, which I think we all know already, but we don't necessarily do. So just very quickly to wrap up, some of our major lessons learned, that communicating with a community, it's a mark of respect and it builds trust. If you don't do it, I don't think you can expect to work well. That it's good to have a team like we had in Haiti, a beneficiary communication team who can bring real skills and capacity and just time to work on this stuff, but it needs to be integrated into the programme. It's not enough to have it as a side event or something that's an add-on. And I think what worked with the INA system, the neighbourhood approach, was that accountability and participation was built into the design of the whole project from the very beginning. Yeah, multiple channels. I mean, this is obvious, but technology alone is not the answer, and neither is face-to-face the answer. If you just use face-to-face communication, can you be sure of the quality? Can you be sure that the people that are doing that communication are feeding everything back to you? So I think you have to have a number of channels to make sure that everyone in the community has a chance to interact with you in a way that they feel comfortable with and that they want to. Ask people what they need to know. It's fairly obvious. And include participation questions and assessments. How do you want to participate? What ways are you comfortable with? And we did that with the INA project. Technology provides big opportunities for opening ourselves up more to communities, for being more transparent and more available to them. But I do agree with what people have said, that you have to be careful not to cut out the section of society who have no access to technology. And that was in this year's World Disasters Report, which the Red Cross produced. Yeah, I've mentioned dedicated communication skills and support really increases the capacity to do this, and that really low participation is still often happening after the project's already been decided. So I think in the background paper it talked about micro accountability, and I think the Red Cross does that quite well, but I'm not so sure about the macro side of things. And I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Sharon. You have shown us that new technologies provides opportunity, and you use this opportunity in your case. And I can see that the legitimacy of the representatives, you have to face that through the committees. And one element I want to talk about is the role that the government can play, because urban situation is, I would say, it's most it represents an interest for most interest for the government. That's why you have this pressure. Social cohesion was not good in your case, but we have the opportunity to have it here. Well, thank you very much. Now we will let you the speech for discussion, questions, and contributions. We will take 3 questions, and we will have the opportunity to answer.
That's just a question for Anne. I didn't know whether I misheard her, but I thought she said that she only managed to interview 3,000 people. Is that what you said?
Sorry?
When we were talking about doing a survey in the slum, and I thought you said that you only managed to interview 3,000 people. That's what you, is that? Seems to be a rather large so I wanted to hear more details about that, about how you did that survey. It seems huge and enormous and a really big accomplishment. But I wanted to know more about the monitoring systems, because then later you said there wasn't a regular monitoring system, so I wanted to know more about that.
I think about the role of your organization regarding Mukuru. I see that there is 2 problems here. One is that you are not engaged. The project is not engaged by the donor in terms of determining what to provide and determining priorities, needs, that kind of, instead of blanket, providing something else. That's one. Second, I think the project is not providing a good mechanism of feedback to the donor. So I see there some problem. I think in terms of this question of engagement, what should be the role of the middleman there? You're sort of a middleman between the community and the donor. And who are we talking about now when we say engaging the community? By whom? Is it you or the donor? I think that there is some problem that need to be addressed there, because this is a specific case. I think that's one observation I have. With regard to Haiti, I think the lessons drawn are very interesting. I think they're focused mainly on communication. The key thing is communication. That communication has worked for you to engage the affected population. I think that's a key concept of this is a comment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and then you
I have a question. I mean, it's regarding the beneficiary communication. It's can be also a big problem. So most probably in the context where you work, there were many other actors active to support the affected population, and they might have a different or slightly different beneficiary communication plan, or different maybe habits. I don't know if in some cases contradicting. So how do we ensure a common approach, a coordinating approach when we are dealing with the affected community, when we have many stakeholders? I mean, not only from the humanitarian side, but also from development, national authorities, and etc. Especially in urban environment where the range of actors it's bigger and more complex. So this is, I mean, I'm curious about the beneficiary communication. It can be also a general obligation for the urban environment.
Last question.
My question is actually very connected with Sharon. The two telephone systems that you had, was that unique to ICRC? And was every other NGO doing something similar? Or was there a way that that was actually covering multiple agencies?
For the coordination question, I mean, it's so difficult. In a way, we were quite lucky with Annex Camp. We were the main actor there. So some of the other agencies were providing some service, and then it was World Vision were providing water. Apologies if I got that wrong. And we did get sometimes questions about the water supply, and luckily we were able to, through our WhatsApp colleagues, have that conversation with World Vision. It's a really difficult one though, about how to make sure when there's lots of different actors in one camp, how can you share that? And actually, it was Barb earlier in the presentation who talked about one complaint line, which ties into what you were talking about in the Philippines. I think if you're looking at a camp like La Peace, for example, there's a lot more actors there. I think there's 50,000 people living in that camp. Then it took having a small coordination team that could work on that. Also in Haiti there was the CDAC network, which was operational, and Ben behind you can tell you more about that. And that was a really good mechanism for people who were working on communication to come together and share some of the experiences of what they were happening. And CDAC also put together, I think it was weekly or monthly report of what everyone was doing, and that was circulated around. So even if you didn't get to the meetings, you could have a read at that and be aware of whatever other people were doing. And when it came to the mass communication, like for the cholera outbreak, then definitely there was much more joint working to make sure that the messages that everyone was putting out were the same messages, so the same kind of health advice, so that people weren't getting contradictory messages. I'm sure it didn't work seamlessly, in fact I know it didn't, but it was a good start. I think there's a lot of work needs to be done in that. On the telephone systems, the telephone Croix Rouge was just for us. We set it up, we organised it, but there was very much a commitment from us, and I left after it was set up, so I'm not sure if it happened. But there was a commitment from us to go to other partners who had expertise in areas that we didn't. For example, maybe elderly or disabled or children, which are areas that we're not experts in. And if there was specific information for these groups, that information could be provided to us, and that we could put that on the phone line. Or if we were working in joint areas, the survey system could be used jointly. So that was certainly the intention when it was set up, that it, while managed by us, it would be open to others to come and speak to us about what their needs would be or how we could make it better jointly. The NULA system was, well, I'll say it was a third party, so they were open. What the way NULA worked was anyone could phone NULA and raise what they needed or make a complaint or their needs, and it would be plotted on an open source logo and have a look at the map. What we did with Shelter was, because it was very, very specific, was we had a separate page, and also we didn't want people phoning in as they left their names or whatever to be able to be searched. Or if it was all an annex camp, like if there were certain issues coming up that people might not want to have in public, and maybe we didn't want to be public either, if I'm completely honest. So the general NULA system was there, and then we had a page that only Red Cross had access to that was just logging the calls from the shelter camps that then we could go on and look at and follow up on. So it was part open and part. And also very technical information as well. It's very, very specific to those projects.
On responding on the first question on the 3,000 interviewees, the directive from the donor was that we have to do 100% identification and verification. So we had to go door to door to the 3,000, but again in a population of 600,000, definitely we left out so many. That's why I felt like that wasn't, we didn't reach out to a substantial number of households that would feel like it's like we have covered everyone who was the extreme side of the problem. But so we had to do door-to-door visits with some forms that we were filling on how household. That's why I said just 3,000, because I'm sure we left out so many. Yeah, I hope that one answers satisfactorily.
Just a reminder that there was a specific 3,000 that were identified, huh?
yeah, we had to do 3,000. So the minute we did 3,000, we stopped. Of course, there are some we were already rejecting from the word go, maybe because they were not falling into the index that we are using to measure the whole issue. But again, we only visited 3,000. I mean, out of 600,000, that's why I was feeling like that was still more substantial.
Thanks.
Then on the other two questions, on our role, we are the ones who engage the community. But it's true, we do not have, how would I put it? We do not have the capacity, not the capacity or the chance to dialogue with the donor what they need to give the community. We presented the problem and the magnitude of the whole problem, but when they were discussing on how to respond, we were not engaged. Yeah, and again, we didn't have our budget also to say we are giving you maybe 20%, so we have to be part of the decision making. So that's why we were, I don't know, maybe that's why we were left out, or they have their own committee. So, but we were the link in the community, we would mobilize, do everything, but again, we were depending on them. But I also look at it on the other side that maybe it's because our skills is more on development, long-term development. They feel like we do not have the technical bit of humanitarian response. Maybe that's why. But in all the response cases, I've seen us being left out. Like in 3 cases, but we do the mobilization, but when it comes to what to respond with, we are not engaged. So I'm hoping maybe things will improve and we'll be engaged and be able to give the appropriate response. And then there was the other one, what is our role? Yeah, I think I've responded on that. And then that we do not provide good mechanism of feedback. That wasn't very clear to me. Like maybe after the response, sometimes we feel like we don't want to badmouth the donor or share the technical bit of it. Like say maybe it's the donor who decided to give you that, not us. So we don't tell them that technicality. But like for that one case when we are responding with the cash transfer, all those questions that they were asking, we actually were giving them the response to just cover it and tell them, that is what was available, and the donor from this country, that's what they wanted it to happen. But again, we didn't tell them, we are not involved in all this, so maybe we'll find a better way of communicating. But I think if we are engaged, we can be able to be on the same table. So I think the problem comes from engagement. It's true we are not engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. We will take other questions.
Well, first of all, just to pay tribute to the Red Cross and the work they're doing in Haiti, where I'm doing some work with Ground Truth. They've been incredibly helpful, and it runs a sort of superb communications operation that was really well described. Samuel, I have a question for you. In the sort of period after the disaster has hit, are you integrating some of your training of volunteers into being able to elicit information from the affected community, so you can continue to have information from the community as to what's happened? So people are really trained ahead of time as part of the preparedness process to be able to get that feedback in very quick time. And to you, Sharon, one of the problems in Haiti, we've been trying to kind of get information back from people who were in camps but no longer are. We have their telephone numbers, but the telephone numbers aren't terribly useful because the SIM cards change frequently. Many people use the same telephone. So when people are in camps, it's relatively easy to get feedback information. But when you're looking at the sort of sustainability over time, how are you tackling that issue to try and keep tabs on people? And in their interest, not from a control point of view.
So mine's very, very quick, a little one. Add on to Anne specifically. You're very diplomatic about how you talk about this donor. I'd be interested to know whether you, how you engage, or do you engage with them in the non-crisis periods? People use the term partnership. Do you understand? Is that what? Do you understand is happening in terms of that relationship, or is it? Could you? I'm not specifics, but could you say a little bit more about how that relationship happens in the longer term,
and whether during the sort of downtime, the non-crisis periods, you are given the opportunity to have some of these discussions with them about improving some of these processes and procedures.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for really, really great presentations. My question is around one of the challenges that we as Action in the Syrian refugee response, working with urban refugees in Jordan and Lebanon, was that we found that a lot of the really basic tools we had for community engagement and participation, social mapping, the wellbeing ranking, the things that we use to target, didn't work in urban populations because they assume that people know each other, they know the geographic location. So is there any really good work going on around adapting participatory tools for an urban context?
Thank you all for your presentations. Very helpful and insightful. So in at least two of your presentations, I think Sam and Jan's, this observation that there was no social cohesion was raised. And I think it strikes me as kind of contrary to a lot of the literature around urban displacement. When we think about how refugees and IDPs actually cope, there is at least a version of literature that focuses a lot on social networks, on people relying on each other. And if we think about migration just generally, from one place to the other, people who usually make it are those with social capital and with networks and that are able to pull on someone else's help. Sam, you mentioned that some of the first responders are actually just community members, people who are right there to help each other. So I'm wondering, how do you reconcile this? Is it that is it just a conceptual issue? What we're calling social cohesion in this context is just very different from what we've heard about otherwise, social networks and so on. Or is it that the structure of the intervention actually incites competition, right? Or is it that there's some tipping point, some threshold beyond which people just say, look, you know what, forget it. It's just about me and I need to compete. How do you actually reconcile?
Okay, the first one about the preparedness side and getting information. When we actually did this study, we fed in a lot of ideas because it was at the stage. Someone who worked with or Sharon or after Sharon in the Haiti response is now working as a delegate in Kathmandu, designing our strategy for communicating, particularly focused on communications with the affected community. So it's both the risk awareness raising and some of those behaviour change elements, and then also what happens in the response. When we did the study, it was more about how the volunteers can tell people to go where relief items have been pre-positioned, when the NFIs are going to be, what to do in relation to aftershocks. But we did highlight the need for a two-way angle on it. So I think that's being rolled out at the moment. But as you highlight, having people who know the communities well and therefore can draw information is a really useful resource that we need to draw on. So I think hopefully that's being integrated into the plans that's being developed now. In terms of actual tools, this is one which comes up all the time in work on urban. There are lots of debates about whether urban is a specific thing that we should even be focusing on, whether it's actually just about context and good, appropriate programming, and whether urban is one context and there's not lots of different types of areas. So that comes into it. That said, some of the issues I looked at around the assessment methodology, particularly what the Federation used and the National Societies on looking at vulnerability and capacity, and the challenges around participation in that sort of approach. There was a whole review done for us by Terry Cannon at the Institute of Development Studies on this, highlighted some of these issues. And it was really focusing more on the challenges. But in terms of the opportunities, I talked about the secondary data that you have in urban areas, the other sorts of information that you can triangulate with the information you get from communities. So you can draw on all these information sources. And what his study really argued that was the participatory process is about bringing people on board rather than just harvesting information from them. It's part of a journey that you're taking them along, and their involvement in the different phases of the program cycle. So that's the idea. Whether we're actually doing that in reality yet, I'm not sure. Specifically on cash and markets, the work that CALP's done, the toolkit on cash transfer programming in urban emergencies is very good. This is something we're doing training with national societies on being prepared to respond in urban areas. Cash is very relevant because markets often get up and running quite quickly. And I know Save the Children are rolling out training based on this toolkit, which includes issues of assessment, some of the challenges around risk management, communications in urban areas. Social cohesion issues, we tend to kind of say there's no social cohesion in urban areas. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but it's because we focus on some of the challenges we've dealt with, and there is, there often is a culture of kind of mutual help and support, but it may manifest itself in different ways. So it's just really about understanding the community better, and really the history of the community, the historical profile of the community, who is involved there. Maybe, because someone's a tenant and they're not involved in the community disaster management committee, it's not because people willfully do not like people they just may not know they're there. There's lack of communication with people, there's lack of time to engage. So it's just about understanding the differences to rural areas, not sort of vilifying urban populations for being, I live in London, so I understand there's sometimes a lack of social cohesion in urban areas.
So on how our partnership relationships takes place when it's not during other programming times, is that in some cases they use our feedback maybe to fundraise and they're able to give us funds, but in some cases they use their strategic plans to raise funds, and then we see how we fit into the activity that has been funded. So in most cases, I would say most of the cases actually, it's them. The dictation comes from up. How they fundraised the money, the activity that they have. They give us maybe a prescription of how that project is. Then we do a concept, how we feel if our activities can fit into that objective. But in some cases, whereby we are involved, it's only at the study level, whereby maybe they are doing a field, a baseline survey. That's when we can participate in giving our feedback in that baseline survey on some issues we feel maybe they need to be addressed. Then if that one is developed maybe to a program, then that one fits very well into our programming. So it's a two-way kind of relationship where sometimes we have to see how we can fit into their already prescribed programs, or sometimes we are engaged and we engage at the baseline level. Yeah.
I feel like in this example we are looking at a missed opportunity to work to have a partnership with national organization to work with the population. So it's something that we can think about. We don't have the opportunity every time to have a good organization working 10 years with the community, creating confidence within the community, and then when we arrive, the international organizations are imposing the way they want to work. It is a miss of opportunity.
So in answer to your question about monitoring families after they've moved out of camps, really difficult. And as I say, I left Haiti in May 2012. I've been there 2 years, so I felt like I'd done my time. So I left before a lot of people had started to move. But what the shelter programme team did was there was a livelihoods grant that was given with every single housing solution, shelter solution. And that livelihoods grant would be paid in 2 instalments, and it would be supported with opportunities for training. So that was one way that we tried to hold on to people and be able to kind of follow what happened to them. They also did follow-up monitoring visits as well, I think it's 6 months and 12 months, to everyone, or as many people as we could still find after they'd moved out of the camp. Logistically, that was quite challenging in some ways, because obviously people were very mobile and may have taken the rental grant and then moved out after 2 months and gone somewhere else. And certainly in the case of, we gave people grants to move back to their home province if that's what they wanted. And obviously logistically that's a challenge if they live at the other end of the country from Port-au-Prince. So I'm probably not the best person to answer that, but we can share contact details and I can probably find out for you. Tools for rural. I don't have a huge amount of information on it, but some of the lessons from Haiti now. There's an urban DRR project starting, the Federation is starting in Africa, targeting 9 centres or cities across the continent, and looking at working with urban communities there to improve their resilience to disasters, particularly looking at climate change and issues of livelihoods. They're using BCA, but they're adapting it to work more for the urban context. And I can again get more information on that for you. Social cohesion, this is the most interesting one. I mean, it was fascinating. We did an evaluation in 2011 that looked at this issue of how information travels through a community. And what they spoke to well, they spoke to more than 2, but they found that in Cité Militaire, which was not a camp area but still quite heavily affected by the earthquake, the people who had stayed there did have quite good social cohesion. Would share information, would listen to the radio together, would discuss what had happened on the radio or with NGOs. So there was, you could really see that there was, and for us that was great in terms of being able to make sure that messages reached everyone and that we could get some sort of consensus back from a community. Within the camps it was variable. I mean, some camps you would have good cohesion, people did know each other, they had all moved from one area and moved together. But annex, that was not the case in the early days, nor was it the case in La Piste. I'm sure there was still small networks of people. There was also a lot of bad networks as well. So there was a lot of people, you know, there was a lot of gang culture and there was a lot of trading that went on as well. So sex for food, sex for money, sex for getting on a beneficiary list. There was a lot of young guys taken into the gang culture, so there was a lot of bad networks as well as some of the good ones, and it was trying to tackle some of that. And the shelter programme did quite a good job in that some of the shelters they built, they actually brought in the gangs to work on those shelters. Some of the young people that were involved in that, as well as actually there was a deaf community that lived there and they brought them in as well. So controversial probably to give gang people a job, but then it also brought them out of that culture. And a lot of those young guys at the end of 2-3 years working with us, building shelters, they had carpentry as a trade, they had something else to go to. So I think it worked well for us.
Hi everyone, I'm Ben. I was the coordinator for communicating with disaster communities engagement for 2 years, currently work for interviews with Humanitarian. So I live in Haiti still today, so following on the long run some of these issues. But, I think that one of the points that I'd like to make is the fact that some of this engagement with the community has been, and at a broader scale, has been difficult in terms of informing programming at a large scale. The shelter response is one of them. I mean, $500 million US spent on key shelters. When people, still today want still say that at the time, if you had even someone in my own house, which regarded all these issues of 10 euros. The other one is this rental subsidy thing is $60 million. Various donors, various agencies doing it. It was informed by something I participated in, which was the intention survey, interagency work, asking people in the camps what they would want to leave the camps, which is a tricky question, asking them directly as well, if they should. But I think one of the major critique of that was actually not looking into observing what people were actually doing, which included taking rental subsidies to build in Canada, which is 110,000 people, and $100 million invested by Haitian themselves without information, technical assistance. So I think this issue, the fact that there's been a lot of communication, a lot of work which has been done by government, done by agencies, but in the end it's very difficult to reach to the point where you're actually forming a program on a large scale, or even having a debate on large scale shelter issues and stuff like that.
Thank you.
A very telegraphic comment on the additional. Thank you very much for pointing out the challenges of working in urban areas, targeting vulnerability prioritization. I want to add another dimension in refugee work, and that is the fact that unfortunately in many situations you have encampment policies. So there is a second, an additional challenge in working with refugees in urban areas, because they are double marginalized. And not only they're marginalized because they are in the informal sector or in slums and so on, but in addition they're doing so in violation of the administrative laws. And unfortunately, there are few countries in the developing world that have liberal. Lebanon is the opposite case. We have seen, there they don't want camps because of the Palestinian experience. There you have the challenges that you have mentioned, but at least there is not this negative regulatory environment. But it is a big problem that so many countries are still in camping policies.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Eric. I work for UNICEF, and I was in Haiti in the first phase of a response to the earthquake in 2010. And I really liked the picture that Stanley put on the screen, where we saw the complexity of working in an urban environment. And in her presentations, you all mentioned the role of gatekeepers and community leaders in engaging with the affected community. So I wonder, based on your experience, how do you identify community leaders? How do you work with them and ensure that the needs of the most vulnerable children and women in particular are taken in that complex environment?
And the last one?
Well, just very briefly, I think all the cases we have are very good, interesting stories, programming, learning, as per for the individual country cases. But my problem maybe I'm not seeing really what are we learning from all this in relation to the big question that we are addressing here. How to engage affected population. These are interesting stories. Learning stories there, but the big question that we have been asked to address, from this morning to this, I think that's where I think we are not really connecting. Are we connecting and coming out with really concrete system or approach in engaging affected people, shelter, this one? I mean, that maybe we can save this discussion for plenary.
Yeah, I will give the speech to the panelists to answer.
Yeah, okay. I think just quickly to answer your point about working with refugees, I was in Freetown in Sierra Leone last year, and there's still a refugee community there who have no identity and who get no real support and who are still totally marginalised. So even long times after conflict has ended, you still often have these migrant communities that are living in small enclaves and usually in slums with very little support. So yeah, I do recognise that as well. Being on the giving money to build your own house, Haiti was not a perfect example at all. And I think we did have those discussions in Red Cross about we're spending all this money to ship all this wood into the country, and maybe it's better just to give people the money. But then if you give them the money and they build a shelter and some gang comes along and takes it off them, 2 weeks later they're back on your doorstep again. I don't think there was a perfect answer to it. And certainly I think the rental grants was a good move, because what people said to us was, before the earthquake we rented. That's what everybody did. So help us rent again. And with a little bit of support, we obviously checked the quality of what we were renting, and that was quite a good solution, although potentially not a long-term one, because there's still no economy to earn money and pay your rent. So, identifying community leaders and hearing the views of women and children. In the case of Annex, we did a couple of evaluations in the surveys, and we found that women quite liked using hotlines, or that was the feedback that we got. So that was one of the reasons that we could have built up the hotline option. And in the early days it was only free on one network, so we also then had somebody with one of these fixed phones that you can walk around with during the day. So if anyone wanted to use it, they could come in and ask to use the phone. So they still had to take the phone away and still have a private conversation. Children, I have to admit, we're not so good at. I had this conversation when I was still in Haiti. Somebody from UNICEF in Haiti asked me, how have you been engaging children? Not as well. I mean, there were some children-focused workshops. Obviously we did women workshops with women and focus groups with women, but yeah, children, I think we've got a lot to learn actually from organisations like yourselves. And then how to engage and what are we learning? I think from Haiti we learned a lot, and a lot of, can you just go back one slide? So I ran out of time, but I did want to say how some of the lessons from Haiti are being used. And as Sam said, in Kathmandu, Mark, who took over from me in Haiti, is using a lot of the stuff that worked there in Kathmandu and applying it to that context. I don't think any one set of tools would work everywhere though. I think you have to look at each context in its own merits. So while some of the things we did in Haiti just wouldn't be appropriate in Nairobi or Freetown or wherever we are. But I think these lessons, they are being documented, there were evaluations done. A lot more could be done to roll them out more widely. So in the case of Red Cross, Geneva, our headquarters, talk a lot about beneficiary communication and how it's very, very important. But there's still only 3 IFRC beneficiary communication delegates in the world. So I would like to see from my own headquarters that they really put their money where their mouth is. So I think there's a long way to go.
Just on the refugee situation, yeah, encampment's a big challenge, and then there's been an increasing focus on how do you engage urban refugees. So IRC did a very good roundtable meeting in October last year that I was at, and there was a lot of reflection about how to do this. I think the Syria regional crisis is very interesting because how donors and some of the international financial institutions are now working with these governments to say, well, these people aren't going anywhere anytime soon, actually. And so the things about livelihoods and that they can't work, and that there are moves to try and bring in the private sector to think about some initiatives that you can do. So I think there are some interesting things going on there, but it's very, very challenging, of course. And there's lots of work. The Women's Refugee Commission were presenting their interesting work on how to outreach and engagement, or making sure urban refugees were brought into some of the livelihoods programs. So I think there are tools that are starting to be used there. Then the issue with gatekeepers, making sure that the most vulnerable were actually dealt with. I think the work I did with Bonaventure in Haiti recently showed that many agencies have different approaches to doing this, and this often relates to how they're set up as a humanitarian or development agency, whether they're targeting based on vulnerability or based on capacity, because they actually want to make more developmental intervention. So it's quite interesting to see. Each has pros and cons, but there are a number of ways you can do this. And as Sharon said, it's not about kind of one size fits all best practice. It's a good practice that's relevant to the context.
I have 2 elements for me that can return from this discussion. One of them is the need to understand better the context in the end to know what to do. The 3 presentations have the diversity, and if you want to work in this context, you need to understand, to understand. Groupe URD, for that, in IT, we have an office which is called Learning Office, and the aim of that is to stay in the country and try to analyze through researchers and speak with people to understand better the context, and then identify to whom we need to speak to what we need to do. And what Samuel said is, through this, the work we did, we talked with many agencies to learn from the strategies that they use and what should be the best one, what should be the future, the one we can use in the future in the same context in IT. So we are trying to analyze and know better. The second element for me is what is related to what one thing one person said today is to be humble enough and when we understand, when now we understand what the people want, to be humble enough to follow what they want. This is something that I think is very important that I can do. I think we can close our panel. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, the panelists.